Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday. And let me just get the chat available here as people come on in. Let me also just make sure everybody can hear us. And Mike, wondering if Mike from Relevant can tell us if he can hear and see us okay. And then while I'm waiting for some feedback, it looks like we're live on both YouTube and LinkedIn. And before we get on into today's session, let's do a touch of banter. So nothing like the first export control being slapped on an AI company. I don't know if you guys saw the announcement. Phyllis, did you see that today? Or it really looks like it was the initial was on Friday. And if not, I'll let you catch up a little bit. But did you see that, Phyllis?
I haven't seen it. Yeah, let me check real quick.
Yeah, while you're taking a look, Phil, did you see that?
I did see it. Yep. Very, very surprising news for the weekend. I was expecting a quiet June weekend, big changes, but people processing this new AI capability. And then, this happens.
Yeah, it's interesting, Phil, because you could take it from a few different angles. One is, hey, we don't want Mythos getting in the hands of potential adversaries, so pull it back, or even foreign nationals that are here. But it is a pretty big step and precedence, in terms of companies that are making massive capital allocation investments in infrastructure and coding and and I'm not taking sides here. I haven't delved into enough to what's right or wrong, but it's certainly a pretty big statement, is it not?
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
I think from my perspective, and we're talking about Fable 5, shutdown's kind of about a new operating reality we're in, right? Frontier AI being treated like strategic infrastructure.
Right.
Access can change overnight, based on national security concerns, regulatory pressure, third party. I mean, that's really what happened here, is that combination of those two or three things. And Andrew, you said something a second ago too, with I think for CISOs and MSPs, the takeaway really is you don't build critical workflows around a single AI provider or model, right? Want to validate where AI is being used across your client environments and document some fallback options.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's an instant lesson on change management.
And this is a board level, executive level conversation. I mean, MSPs and MSSPs and their clients, right, to stay resilient.
Phyllis, before I go to you, just speaking of board, Brian, because we talk about this a lot, about getting board level conversations and leadership conversations for capital allocation. I was speaking to an MSP not too long ago where the board of directors, unbeknownst to them, told the company to invest, it was something like $200,000 into 3 or 4 of the AI models and quote unquote figure it out. But to your point, if you're hey, we're all in on Anthropic in this case, you could have some pretty big ramifications, couldn't you, in terms of putting this is a whole new supply chain issue, isn't it not?
Well, heck yeah, if it's suddenly overnight pulled from production, right? It's there one day and not the next. I mean, that's
right.
A huge resilience and eggs in one basket concern.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, Phyllis, how about you on this?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think what's interesting, I just did a quick glance where it says, in particular, Commerce Department told Anthropic no foreign nationals should have access inside or outside. And I think that's a restriction level to another level, as all companies are international. So This idea of thinking that companies don't have foreign nationals working in them and that you can restrict access that way, I think is an interesting take.
Yeah.
But if you're Anthropic, I mean, to your point, Phyllis, what else can you do other than take the whole thing down? Foreign nationals, even in the U.S., right? It's like,
right.
How do I do this?
So I'll be interested to see if there's, what kind of reclama, what kind of response companies, just U.S. companies in general, are going to have.
Yeah,
it'll be hard. It'll be hard to enforce, and it will be hard to implement.
Yeah. More fireworks here in the U.S. as always. No, but great country, obviously we're in. But man, it's political things are really ramping themselves up more than ever here in terms of what macroeconomically and Go ahead, Phyllis. You were going to say.
I was going to say it's hard to do that kind of screening when you've already done all your hiring, right? So I came from the National Security Agency where there's a pre-screen.
Right.
Like, are you a U.S. citizen? Have you ever been convicted of a federal offense? You know what I mean? Like there's these things that you pre-screen, so then it's okay. You can comply because you knew ahead of time. But once you've already hired, you have your hiring process and you do all the stuff, to kind of switch in the middle, I think is difficult.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. All right. Well, let's get on into it. Big day here at the Cyber Call. Once a year, we get the dubious honor of hosting Phil Langlois, principal author of the Verizon Data Breach Report. Phil, I think we're in our 4th or 5th year now. I can't remember exactly what one, but what's cool is it coincides with our annual anniversary, so to speak. We're in our 6th season now, going into 6 to 7, Phyllis. It's hard to believe. Today, man, the report, Phil, is absolutely packed with data. Biggest one yet in terms of confirmed breaches, over 22,000, 145 countries. And I know you've got a lot in the pipeline besides the Verizon data breach report in itself. I don't know what you can and can't talk about, so feel free to either share that momentarily or not. But welcome back to the Cyber Call, Phil. Tell us a little about yourself and what you got going on there at Verizon.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, name is Philippe Langlois. I'm the lead data scientist for the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. I've been on the team for about 7 years now, and I do pretty much all the charts, majority of data analysis, a couple jokes here and there, and then naturally go around and spread the good word in terms of what we found. Prior to working at Verizon, I actually worked with Phyllis on the CIS critical security controls. And before that was at the MSISAC, helping with some other kind of data-driven initiatives that they had at the time too. So, the reason why I think I found a good home at Verizon is, especially on this project, is the community, right? I think this is the reason why we produce this report, is we want to give back. And the reason why we're able to write this report is because organizations are willing to collaborate with us. So, and I think CIS kind of represents that as well. And so don't, find folks here. Right, the Cyber Call, I think, has really kind of been an opportunity for me to reach back, especially to, I think, an often neglected area, MSPs. So, always thrilled to be here this year.
Thank you for that, Phil. Before I hand it to Chris, is there a favorite chart type you have, whether it's spaghetti, whether it's some of the really unique ones that you've developed over the years? Is there a perennial favorite that you have?
I really like the dot plots, right? The distributions. And I think part of it is we have this personal vendetta on our team against means. You get really terrible data science takes here, right? We have objections against using averages because they skew so much the results, right? And that's why we try to represent the full distribution and try to especially focus on the median, because then that provides more of an accurate representation to what most organizations are probably going to contend with. So that's kind of our pet favorite. I also like a heat map because I like looking at relationships between two variables. But yeah, I mean, I think those are two solid charts that I'm very happy with.
Yeah.
He maps are prettier anyway.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of pretty, Chris, let me hand it over to you.
Thanks, Andrew.
And certainly, we don't want to talk about what wasn't pretty in San Antonio this past weekend. But aside from that, I won't go there, Chris. I won't even talk about it.
No, we're not going to talk about that at all. So, hey, thanks, Andrew. Phil, I'll just say, I mean, this report is always one to look forward to. I know the majority of the MSPs I talk to, it's one of those things that when it comes out, they dig right into it. And I would say, for me, being in the IR world, especially for the last 7-8 years, it's one thing to kind of see what's changed. Even the smallest things are good indicators of what people need to look forward to in the coming year or so. So definitely, you should be proud of that report. But before we get to that and kind of dig into the data and the dot maps and the heat maps and all that kind of dot charts, just kind of give the audience a little bit in plain terms what this report's all about.
Sure thing. Yeah. So the DBIR has been around for about 19 years now. And it started as initially just looking at Verizon data, right? Because we had a forensic, we had incident response team. We conducted incident response for our clients. We started looking at 2 years back. And then from there, we really started, we published the first 2 reports. And then the U.S. Secret Service came to us and they said, we have a bunch of data too, right? We would be interested in sharing kind of what we're seeing as well to provide kind of this threat landscape that's actually data-driven. So since then, we've grown to, think this year, we finally hit the threshold of over 100 different contributing organizations that provide us the data. So, we have this pretty representative data set of breaches, incidents, but then we also have access to, large vulnerability management data set, threat intelligence. So we're able to kind of pull these threads together in a relatively unique way. I think a lot of organizations can't, right? Because we're able to look at, this is what breaches are saying, this is what patch management vendors are seeing from their perspective, and really kind of provide a cohesive view of the cybersecurity landscape.
Yeah, no, you make a good point. Is there's a lot of stuff that even if you tried to embark to do this yourself, it would be very expensive and very difficult, and a lot of times you probably get it wrong. So it's best to leave professionals like yourself to handle that and get the right information in front of people. So 22,000 confirmed breaches across 145 countries. That's the biggest data set in this report's history. What is it like sifting through all that data and trying to make sense out of it?
Exhausting, right? There's a lot of nuance, and we're fortunate that we're kind of, we've built a lot of our process on automation, right? So we have a data standard that says, these are the values that are allowed. These are kind of the coding frameworks we have. So each of these records go through and get validated, twice by authors, right? So each record is in some way reviewed by us. And then, it's also gone through this automation process to go and verify. So, and of course, the trade-off is we can't give the same level of attention of each record, right? Sometimes we just have this one thing happen 100 times to these 100 different organizations, right? And we can kind of just expand on that. And other times we have full forensic reports, right? So some of our partners give us, redacted information, and this is, step by step, this is what the attacker did. So, as part of our analysis, we try to make sure we accommodate for when, we have the full details to when we also don't have the full details, right? And that there's this level of granularity that, no one really has a full picture, but, sometimes we have these threat actors and they have an MO and there's things they tend to like to do. So we can kind of extrapolate based on some of those, known past behaviors.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, Chris, a quick question for Phyllis. Phyllis, when you see the Verizon report come out, what's the timeline when you start looking at this for the community defense model? And can you, just for those that may not understand what the community defense model is, can you kind of talk about that correlation and how do you guys start coordinating with Phil and the team?
Oh, yeah. So, as much as I can, I try to pump Phil for information before it's released, but he's so tight-lipped. I try, but he toes the line for Verizon. So what we do is we look at it, and the great thing about the DBIR is, number one, it is the gold standard, and it also is a common way for people to talk about attacks and attack types, and that's one of its biggest strengths, in my opinion. Like, we could, what we don't want to do is talk differently about different attack types. And so, number one, we use that as a standardized way to identify attack types, like system intrusion. What does that mean? What does web application hacking mean? Insider threat. And year over year, they continue to break things apart, and they, do certain things. Like one year, even though ransomware was a part of system intrusion, we still pulled it out. But the data shows us, and the way that Phil explained it, why ransomware is a part of system intrusion. This year, we decided to keep system intrusion as the way to define an attack type and include ransomware within that, even though ransomware still gets a lot of publicity. But we also work with that data set to get attack patterns and to say, is our prioritization correct of the top 5 attack types of these attack patterns, as we use MITRE attack as a standardized way to identify what attack techniques exist, what mitigations exist. We always are checking our prioritization. So as soon as it hits, I ask the team, let's look at it. What does it say? Is our prioritization still relevant? And I think it's very important. Of course, with our partnership with VDBIR, they do point to controls as recommended mitigations, which is much appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I don't think I gave this question to Chris or the team, but can you just quickly define Veris for those that start thumbing through the report? Because I think that's a really important piece of this.
Yeah, sure. So Veris is our standardized language for categorizing and capturing the most key elements of a data breach. We consider it kind of the vocabulary of breaches. In essence, every record of incident or breach that goes into the DBIR, right, we capture 4 or 5 key elements. Victim demographic level information, right? So all the data we get is anonymized, but we're just interested in high level demographics so we can do our slices and dices of the data set. And then there's 4 things that we consider important to capture. The asset, right? What was impacted? The action, how was it impacted? The actor, who impacted it? And then the attribute, what kind of impact was it, right? Was it breach of confidentiality? Was, a change of a system? Was an availability impact? And those 4 elements really make up kind of, the core of our analysis, right? So we've been developing this standard for 15 years now. And every couple of years, we'll go through and update it, right? Because we'll find that one of the actions isn't representative anymore, right? Doesn't show up, or there's a new type of attack, right? There's a new type of that we have to start capturing. So, we go and update the process. It's freely available on our GitHub account. So if anyone wants to start tracking their own incidents, they can go and access it for absolutely free, right? And that's just, once again, it's how we standardize everything. And we also have mappings to things like attack, right? Which is a little more tactical level than what we normally see in Veris. But at the end of the day, right, you're just slicing different layers of the same pie.
Got it.
Yep. I have a question for you back when you're talking about how you look at the different groups and what they do. It seems to me these days in the last 12, 16 months, seems to be a new ransomware operator pop up or a couple every month.
Yeah.
Is that making your job easier or harder? Are they just the same thing, just rebranded, or what are your thoughts on that?
It is such an immensely painful thing to do. So I had the pleasure of going back, I think it was 10 years of ransomware actors, right? Because we had this payment information from different threat intelligence companies. And I was curious, how much money are these guys really making, right? So I tried to go and map every single threat actor from these different threat intelligence companies. Such an arduous process, right? But really, at the end of the day, the majority of these are just, splinter groups, or they kind of siphon off. So, there's value in terms of when we can, attribute certain campaigns to be like, oh, okay, shiny hunter does X, Y, and Z, right? So there's probably, these were the actions that happened. But there's so many smaller groups, and honestly, a lot of these small groups don't really have that many victims. So, we can kind of just say like, well, there's some ransomware that probably does something with credentials or an exploit.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, and talking about credentials being stolen, for 18 years, stolen credentials were the reigning champ for number one reason for a breach or entry into a breach. This year, they fell down to second place to vulnerability exploitation. And I know to MSPs, that's probably no surprise because they've been battling vulnerability exploitation. So walk us through what's happened over the last 12 months to kind of flip that script.
Yeah, so I think to really get an understanding as to what happened in the last 12 months, we have to start looking back what's been happening since like 2023, right? 2023 was kind of this inflection point where you started to see the pretty dramatic rise of exploitation or vulnerabilities. And then this year, it's just kind of continued to increase, right? So we've been tracking, a large amount of different stats around, the especially the SysAKEVs. So the SysAKEVs are what we consider the critical vulnerabilities, right? They're the known exploited vulnerabilities, which for us is just a great data point, right? Because it tells us two things, right? These are very critical vulnerabilities, and then people are attacking them, right? Are leveraging them in some fashion. So we can really leverage that and look in terms of the trends. Well, how many more of these vulnerabilities are there? And we've seen an increase. And how many more, how quick are attackers able to exploit these? And we've also seen an increase since 2023, right? They're quicker to respond. A large amount of these are also coming out as 0 days, in which case there's not a whole lot you can do, right? You get caught off guard. And these are largely kind of like these edge devices. So we're seeing this convergence, right, where we have more of these vulnerabilities. Attackers are getting better at leveraging it. And it's also a wider group of attackers that are leveraging, these types of vulnerabilities. It used to be, nation state actors were kind of the ones that are really prolific. Now we see a large amount of, criminal organizations that are also developing their own 0 days to leverage. So, it's a kind of these compounding factors that have made it very profitable for attackers to leverage vulnerabilities.
Yeah, for sure.
Chris, quick question to Phil. Phil, obviously the attackers, you mentioned the edge devices. It's been like a field day since 23 on VPNs and edge devices. Do you feel and then how much of the data says maybe they're just, digging into code that, they patch one, okay, there's tons of tech debt here in this code. We're just going to use AI to chain something else together. Do you have a sense of what's going on and why, it's just this round robin between, I won't name names, but we know the companies that continuous over and over and over. Do you have any thoughts or insights into that?
It's hard to know, right? What can be who's finding these vulnerabilities, right? Who's finding and what's introducing these vulnerabilities? Is it tech debt? Is it, they merged with some company and that company had tech debt that they've kind of incorporated and that's what's causing a lot of issues? It's really hard to kind of pull those apart and, be able to identify, this is the real cause. But, when we mentioned, 2023, we've seen this kind of inflection point and you're like, well, that's kind of when these AI platforms started getting good at finding vulnerabilities. All right. So maybe that is one of the factors, right? I think the majority of folks who are doing vulnerability hunting and are using it in some fashion. Right? I think that's pretty much on par with Googling things now. Like no one has written code without Googling. I don't think a lot of people are writing code without AI in some fashion, in some way in the loop. So it's kind of hard to pull these things apart. I mean, I wouldn't be shocking if that was, at least something that would be contributing to this.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that if you want to call it the threat, the industry from a threat actor perspective, they're just better at what they do, man. I mean, they learn from their lessons pretty darn quickly, and they improve way more rapidly than what we're used to in just traditional business world. They're incredibly motivated to do so. So why not?
That's interesting, Chris, because I remember back in the early 20s, even be sitting in a cafe with you and you were, on some like telegraph, almost negotiating with a threat actor. So it's an interesting comment you made about they're getting better, and not that that's earth shattering, right? We see them constantly changing their attack types, but they're fairly standard. But are you seeing where do you see them getting better, if you will?
I see them better at kind of standardizing their approach. So they're really good at the way they get things done. The time horizon is way smaller now, where we would see people in there, 2 to 3 months ahead of time. I mean, it's 2 to 3 days when they're doing their exfil, they're dropping their ransomware, and they're done, right? And I think just from a negotiation perspective, what I've seen is they're fairly, a lot of these groups are not as flexible. Like sometimes you would be able to, string out communications for a while. They're like, no, I mean, you got 2 days or 3 days or a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and we're flipping it and we're moving on to the next victim. So that's where we're seeing it.
I'm interested, and I'll let you finish here, Chris, with Phil.
Mm-hmm.
But interested if Phil when we get to the question, Phil, has some context of, the ransomware payments, people aren't, and that whole piece of, is it based on resilience? It's like people just going, hey, I'm not paying. So let's hold that thought. But Chris, I'll finish up.
Yeah, and then kind of on the same theme, median time to patch went from 32 days to 43 days. That's a big change. A 34% jump in the wrong direction for sure, while AI is compressing the attacker's timeline from months to hours. For an SMB being supported by an MSP, which almost every one of them are today, how do you even begin to close a gap that's widening on both ends?
Yeah. So as a small business, right, your only leverage is understanding what the contract is with your MSP, right, and what the obligations are, and being able to prioritize, right? There's a lot of critical vulnerabilities, right? There's a lot of kevs out there, but the ones that are on your perimeter device, right, that's number one priority, right? That's the ones you have to patch as quick as possible, because attackers are really good at scanning for those, right, and finding those and then just hammering their exploit wherever they can. So being able to figure out, well, how is priority happening? Are they supporting your firewalls? I don't know. This is the area where I lean to you guys and be like, I don't know what the normal contract looks. I don't know in terms of how much visibility SMBs have on their perimeter.
Well, that's one thing I want to ask Brian. Maybe Brian, this is something you deal with day in and day out, in terms of people either there's certainly some really good MSPs that have great process, great SOPs on vuln management, but I would argue the majority of the companies you talk to, it's still, I want a scanner because we're going to use it as a sales tool. And it's mind-boggling still to me that, if we were to look under the MSP and souse what they may be really responsible for. So
yeah, it's nuts, right? Scanning is not a strategy. How often have I said that, right? Scanning produced a list of things, and the issue isn't just patching is slow. It's this double whammy where patching is getting slower, and the issue is that attacker timelines, the velocity is increasing, right? Getting faster when remediation timelines are getting slower. That's a bad combination. That's where the gap where pain and breaches happen. So the danger is in that widening gap between attacker speed and defender speed. And Andrew, MSPs really need to start considering really two patching motions, right? Routine patching for normal systems, normal stuff, and an emergency exposure response for like the internet facing and the actively exploited or business critical systems is something to consider, because attackers, like Chris was sharing, they think in chains and in paths, right? They don't look at a vulnerability, a password, a help desk process, or a remote access to our third-party supplier as separate things, right, or a separate risk, right? They look at how those things connect and interact.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were going through their process of firewall, like updating their firewall. They're like, yeah, we have all these HA pairs. We have to go through a process to sandbox and test the. I'm like, you understand that all that whole time, you're going to have to figure out a better way, because these firewall vulnerabilities, you don't have all the time in the world to do that. So you might have you have this process, and you might have had it in place for 3 or 4 years, and you're comfortable with it, but it's not going to work for you going forward. You're going to have to figure out a quicker way, and you're going to have to explain to the business, hey, we might have to take something down in the middle of the day, because 5 minutes or 10 minutes of downtime to get this thing done is going to be a hell of a lot better than 2 or 3 weeks or more of downtime because we didn't patch it quick enough. So,
yeah, as a CISO, I don't want a list of 5,000 vulns, right? I want to know which of the 15 exposures create the most likely path to business interruption.
I'm going to ask this question to you, Brian, as we hand it to Phyllis, because both Phyllis and Phil are dealing more with cyber insurance now as well in terms of their data sets. Cybersecurity questionnaires, Brian, still focus very heavily. They're getting way better, obviously, very much more scrutinized and detailed and things like that. However, it's very control-centric. And when does it flip from being, yes, controls are important, to what the business critical applications are, so that maybe that's the impetus to help drive those leadership conversations and get better agreement and alignment on when we should be patching and taking down mission critical apps because there is a vulnerability that's being currently exploited in the wild, et cetera, things that really impact revenue. We're still kind of in the plumbing in terms of, and like I said, insurance is getting better at asking better questions, but it's certainly missing the mark in terms of what's critical to the business.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing a growing trend in, especially in mid-market and enterprise, is these contracts that flow down. And cyber risk insurance and even the questionnaires are usually coupled with some sort of data protection agreement or data protection addendum or security controls, data privacy, compliance requirements flow down in contracts. And what I'm seeing more the last couple of years is where it actually spells out vulnerability remediation of criticals and highs, and then being able to have either penetration tests or sharing vulnerability scans sometimes is being flowed down in contracts. And I think we're just going to keep seeing that more because, like we've talked about many times, supply chain, we're all technologically kind of married to one another. And if you're vulnerable, then so am I. And so there's higher level of, to your point, Andrew, due diligence through contracts, cyber risk insurance requirements, and even vulnerability remediation requirements and pen test requirements.
Got it. All right, Phyllis, over to you.
Yeah, sure. So, Phil, we're talking about KEVs as a way to prioritize what you should be patching first. And even still, you saw only 26% of the KEVs remediated this past year, down 38%. So obviously, we've been talking about orgs getting worse at patching. We were hoping the trend would be different. But if you were going to deliver that stat to a room full of MSP techs, what would you want? How would you want them to react?
I'll tell you how I don't want them to react, right? And I don't want them to be surprised.
Right.
Because this shouldn't be surprising to anyone that there's been a pretty dramatic increase in terms of the number of KEVs and vulnerabilities, especially in the last year, right? This isn't something that no one was expecting, right? It's been this building trend. So I think that's the first thing, right? Is that people will probably be like, okay, like, I know that this has been a problem because this is what we're facing day to day. The worst reaction, because being surprised would mean that you're not paying attention or you don't know that these vulnerabilities are in your environment, that you may not have comprehensive scanning, or you may not necessarily be, fully aware of where these exposures reside in, your clients or your own environment. So, ideally it would be an opportunity to, exactly as Brian was saying, like build in prioritization process, right? There has to be some triage. Waiting for, 1 a month patch is not sufficient enough, right? There needs to be a way which we can go through and expedite patches, especially for anything that's internet exposed, right? As quickly as possible. So, the hope that there's a awareness of that and also, an appetite to go and address that, right, in a comprehensive way.
Right. And so it's no one's surprised that third party involved in breaches jumps like 60% year over year. And now it's at 48%, which is almost, half of everything. And the report says that compromising an MSP can open the door to dozens or hundreds of client environments. Of course, we on this call know that as well. It's like perfect one-stop shopping. So, how do you think that MSPs should be thinking about this? Should they be up at night? Is it the new normal that everyone is just accepting? And what is it that they should be doing about it?
So, part of it is that there's, these massive downstream impacts, right? And, we've been doing more research, even looking historically at, things like cyber insurance claim data, right? Which we have a new report coming out tomorrow. The breach
tomorrow? Yay. Okay, good.
It's tomorrow. This is the free plug Andrew allowed me to have. Where we're looking at some of these types of claims, and you see there's these events that are large scale. There's a lot of downstream impact, and you find that it was MSP that was impacted, and all of a sudden, hundreds of businesses were impacted with ransomware, and the cost of it doesn't just come down to the MSP, but it's also to all the downstream clients, and what are the expectations from those downstream clients, right? And as an MSP, you function largely on the trust of your clients, right? And that's really I think a moment that would shatter that trust with your clients and yourself. So it's, it ends up being a very large business impact, right? And this is cybersecurity for an MSP is a business component. I don't think it's something that we can say as an add-on, or it's, right. I think it's an expectation. It's an expectation that you're going to do your diligence to protect your clients. And if you're being used as the vector, that's problematic.
Phil, for Anne, can you just repeat the report that's coming out? And I'm assuming on the same landing page that you not the same landing page, but the same homepage where you can see all of Verizon's report.
Yeah. So it's the breach impact study, the BIS, because we like our short little report acronyms. And I think you can register for the webinar right on our main page.
Got it. Phil, if my memory serves me correctly, and I hope it does, but wasn't this prior year in 25, the first year, you had a hunch? I think I'm paraphrasing even the words about third party, and that we should start tracking it. Is that does my memory serve me correct?
We've been having this hunch, and there's a couple ways in which we understand third parties, and it's a large boat because, as Brian said, we're all connected in some fashion, right? Whether that's software developers in which we're pulling in dependencies from, or it's MSPs are providing services for us, or it's a hosting provider, right? There's a lot of touch points, right? And we're not an island, so we're all interconnected, and we're really trying to pull that thread and identify, well, what are the major risks, right? And what are the shifts, right? What are the shifts? I think we're going to have difficulty predicting, putting on my telepathic precog helmet. 2027, we're probably going to be talking about supply chains again, right? The team PCP type of attacks, supply chain, right? We don't think we have the full scope as to what the impacts are, because organizations don't necessarily know if they've been impacted, but we're going to kind of see this spill out throughout the year. But this is going to be something that we're going to continue to be seeing, and same thing with hosting providers too.
Well, I'll tell you, I think because I'm obviously in the thick of this in one way or another in these kind of supply chain or downstream ones. And I think it'll be interesting if you guys come up with a way to stratify that. For example, I've seen it where like a 20-person company is impacted and they have giant clients. Yeah. And then it's just this big impact. And then you take something like Canvas as an example, where they're a larger company, and then they have clients of all sorts of different sizes out there. And I think there's different formulas or different ingredients when it comes to these types of attacks, and they're not all the same. And you do need to understand the risk, because you may have like this small company that's a 20-person company that does an exceptionally good job of what they have. But if those guys get compromised and it's a ripple effect,
Right.
the likelihood of them staying alive and financially sound for another 12 months is.
But yeah, no, it's a fair point, Chris. But this year, I think Phil is going to have some interesting data, right? Phil, I mean, when I say 2027, Phil, sales will off drift, and then you have shiny hunters. To Chris's the other side of your point, Chris, shiny hunters freaking damn, just ripping through the biggest, the big right now.
That's right.
So like the Medtronic and things like that, Phil, are going to be really, I think, interesting for your data set this year as well. So
yeah, and impact. That's like to Chris's point. Right, you have these 20 organizations, 20 people organizations, relatively small, not necessarily huge, revenues and things like that. But the impact is so much bigger than that, because it's not just a question of records they have, right? It's the downstream processes that they're impacting, right? In the downstream. So it's, if you're an insurance provider, it's kind of this additional calculus where it's no longer, can we just say, how many records do you have? It's, well, what's the possible impact as well to your downstream partners, right? And, for me, I come from a critical infrastructure background. It's all pipelines, right? Everything is, you're serving a process for some, for the grid, or you're moving water, what have you, right? The impacts to you isn't really the big deal. It's always the downstream stuff that ends up being the bigger deal.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Phyllis.
Yeah. So, the report says the number of ransomware incidents actually went up. However, the median ransomware payments actually went down from 150K to around 139,875K. And now the majority of victims, 69% of victims now refuse to pay. So that, sounds good. But is this progress? Are attackers just, also kind of gaming the system and adjusting their math because some things just got more profitable? So it's kind of like you spam, you spray, and then you hope whatever happens, you're going to get 1 out of every 1,000 or something. And that's a win for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, you look at ransomware, kind of started 2013, 12, 11, right? Crypto wallet, right? It was really consumer focused, and then started to focus on large organizations, and it really kind of exploded. And now you see this shift back towards small organizations, because they're doing exactly as you're saying, right? They're spraying and praying, right? They're either going through large lists of credentials and they're trying to find some way in that way, or they're spamming exploits across the internet and just going through their process. So as part of that, you see a large amount of small businesses, I think a disproportionate amount of small businesses are getting impacted by ransomware. So for those organizations, they obviously probably don't have as much resources to pay ransomware. They may not be as incentivized, or they don't know where to go for help. So, we see these elements where the number of ransomware incidents is continuing to grow, but the folks willing to pay is shrinking, right? So maybe that's one of the driving factors as to why the price is also decreasing. Maybe it's because they're also targeting smaller organizations, and those, by their very nature, don't have as much resources, right? Because they have a calculus as to how much they're going to charge you based on your revenue, right? They have a little ticker that's kind of around a certain percentage, and that's what they're going to ask for, because they figure you can probably cover it.
I think there's just so many now. I mean, the problem is I get the feeds, and I'll see big names. Like I saw one the other day that was University of Georgia. I think 2 or 3 years ago it would have been a big deal, but there's like, okay, it's just another victim. And I just think that when I'm having these conversations with people and they're concerned about their reputation or whatever, I'm like, well, what do you do? Where are you at? Where are you located? Is anybody really going to be paying attention to this? And usually the answer is no. And I said, you're one of probably 300 companies that are going to be identified this week.
Yeah.
Who cares about you? And I think a little bit, not to give the ransomware some intel, but I think they're just attacking too many companies right now. And so
fatigue, no one cares.
No one cares. Yep. It's all noise.
They care. They care when it starts impacting their business, right? And that's
right.
And that's like the importance of the recovery element and being able to quickly spin back up. And some threat actors don't even bother with deploying ransomware, because it's just easier to exfil and threaten, because you need a certain levels of skill to go move across a network and escalate your privileges. But if you just have access to a VPN account, you can probably just steal data.
And Phil, what you just said, I think, is real important too. Lower payments sounds encouraging, but it doesn't automatically mean lower business impact. And I think that's an insight that we should keep in mind. Lower ransomware payments, it's good progress, but it doesn't mean it's been lower business impact to these smaller businesses, right? The real question, to your point, is whether clients can restore operations fast enough that paying isn't even part of the decision tree.
And I'd like to say we're making progress, right? We've been talking about ransomware. My God, that past decade, right? Hopefully by now the message has been received. The importance of having backups, which once again, that's a message as old as computers, right? You can't always rely your servers to be up. So maybe we are making progress in that regard. Unfortunately, that's one of the things we kind of lack the detail from our data set, is what organizations are doing. What were they doing, right, as part of the breach, right? Because of course you'd like to say everyone's competent, but there's clearly something that failed, right? There was some, and we don't have visibility into what controls failed or what controls worked, right? What ultimately made the big change.
So I'm going to hand it over, in the interest of time, I'm going to hand over to Brian, but I am going to ping Brian just one quick question. I don't know if it's appropriate to answer now, if you have enough time, or maybe another call. So everyone's waiting for this report. It's a great report. And, in your job, Brian, I'm not going to go to my board and say, okay, I'm going to show Phil's crazy graphs. No offense. I mean, I love them, but I'm going to be like, okay, here's all this data. I need money for cybersecurity. How do you break that down? So how does an organization take this report and say, now I'm going to use this to get money for my cybersecurity program? And maybe again, that's another call, but I think that'd be interesting.
Brian, you would write a 100-page report with the Verizon report, and then
accompanied by at least 300 slides.
Yeah.
All made with Claude.
With a bunch of stats. Yeah,
for sure. It probably is better suited for another call at another time. But I think at the end of the day, it becomes not so much a laundry list, but more of an operational playbook for me. If I look at, and really, if you're any MSP out there, you should really take that Verizon data breach report, and it becomes an operational playbook. How am I stacking up against the way that attackers think about attacking you? Because we've talked about MSPs are in the supply chain. You are critical infrastructure to your clients. Your RMM tools, you're a very tasty target, right? You're one to many. And so you're part of that critical infrastructure. But as an operational playbook, what are the things that we're doing? How do we stack up to the way that attacks are really happening out there, at least on the confirmed breaches and the data that Verizon has? How are these things actually happening, and how does our program, if we are compromised, if somebody does click on something they shouldn't, what's the ability to traverse east and west? Are we still dealing with MFA problems? Largely, and I don't mean to take anything away from the report, but largely it's this attack at the basics, a lot of basic hygiene things that we continue not to do well. So focus on being brilliant at the basics and process a repeatable thing, but take the attacks to heart, because that's what's really happening. This Verizon data breach report is solid evidence of what's really happening. And if you look at the volume of data, if I'm an MSP too, the volume of data, these aren't just edge cases, right? This is a lot of stuff going on, and this is confirmed. Phil, how many, and I don't know, we don't have a way to quantify this, but how much of these breaches happen that aren't part of your data set, that aren't even reported or confirmed or public?
So much more, right? Especially internationally, right, we're kind of withholding to laws and partners, right? Who has to disclose, and who has access to or have opportunity to touch points. So we're really only looking at a fraction. We really treat it as a sample.
Right. And I love what you said, Brian, because that is the one thing that I got out of Phil before he said, Phyllis, you're going to love the message of the overall report. That's all he said. And then when you read on the first page of the report, it basically says, hey, even with Gen AI, even with all these different things, it's back to the basics.
Yeah.
Right. Essential cyber hygiene. That's what we need to implement. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So sorry. Yeah.
And I would say on this disclosure thing, it's interesting because, I hear, more companies are getting sued for data breaches, even at smaller numbers of records breached. So, you're talking 50 or less. There's attorneys out there trying to get people to sue you. And so, it's tough to get people to voluntarily disclose because of the legal ramifications. It would be a different thing if they could say, hey, look, if you can at least provide us some information and there's no legal risk, we'd probably have even more data.
That's a really good point, Chris. Brian, let's get some questions in with you, bud.
Oh yeah. So Phil, just picture an MSP, the classic MSP, right? 5 overworked technicians and engineers, 40 clients. So they're dealing with vulnerability exploitation, third-party risk, shadow AI, right? Mobile social engineering. They can't fight all of these things at once. If you force them to pick just one of those to focus on for the next, say, 90 days, which one would actually move the needle the most?
Vulnerability management, right? Anything you can do to be able to quickly remediate vulnerabilities is a movement in the right direction. And the way I kind of look at it is we're not going to patch our way out of this problem. So if we can't do that, then we have to look at what else can we do? How much can we reduce the exposures of our internet facing assets? If we can't reduce those, how can we harden those, right? What type of things can we do to make it more challenging of a target for attackers? So, as much as we kind of address these vulnerabilities and these prioritization, I think that's the number one priority. And just because the impact of those are so large, right? There's a direct route for ransomware.
Gosh, that should be humbling for all of us, Phil, because it's not a tech problem, right? It's an operating model problem. For years, many of us treated vulnerability management kind of like a back office function, right? Scan, report, ticket, patch when you can. That model's dead, right? For MSPs, vuln management can't be a monthly, I think you said this earlier, can't be a monthly PDF that gets emailed to the client and forgotten.
Well, I knew quite
an operational discipline.
Yeah, and I knew quite a few MSPs, unless they wouldn't remediate unless it could be automated, right? So if it was something where they had to manually step in and do something, that got put on the back burner or the back burner, and that's no longer the case either. You have to remediate regardless of what method it takes to do it. You got to get it done.
Well, and Chris, oftentimes the things that get put on the back burner, from my experience, are the most critical interfacing things that have the highest amount of fragility. Oh my gosh, if I touch it, it'll break, and then those vulns live for forever and ever.
Yep.
So, well, you probably can't answer this one, but I'll ask. You and your team are probably already started collecting data for the 2027 report, or will soon. Without giving away any trade secrets, what's the one trend that you see that's brewing in this year's numbers or this year's report, or 2027 report, that you suspect is going to be the top headline next year?
That's a good question. I kind of want to say.
Can you answer it? Are you allowed?
Not without any assurance. This is my opinion, right? If I were to look in my crystal ball, right, I think we're going to continue to see vulnerabilities, continue to grow. I don't think that's going to change. I think the supply chain and the third party is going to be a really interesting area. And you guys can quote me on this. If it doesn't end up being in the report next year, you can call me out and be like, yeah, Phil, you said third party was going to be a big thing. But I think it's we're seeing these shifts in terms of how we're writing code, how we're operating as businesses. And I think we're seeing also the shift of attackers, right? We're seeing the first flare-ups of that. I think it's going to become, some level of trend in the future. So that's the kind of things I'll be anticipating in next year's report.
Well, Phil, in terms of being a developer, right? Doing, walking away in the evening and saying, automate any type of updates from, my MCP and any type of, code. That as humans, we like to tend to be lazy. That's our default. And attackers know that too. Attackers are lazy. So they're going to focus on what's easiest, aren't they not? You've seen this for years. And I'll, again, paraphrase, I think it was last year where we asked you, Phil, is there, what's new this year, so to speak? And you were like, not much. It's still the basics. But now we're getting to some different things here, but it was well taken, so to speak.
I think that the basics still apply, right? It's the, trusting third-party libraries and trusting third-party, right? I think there's been some shifts and there's been kind of a laxing in terms of, we're just going to pull whatever is, the most recent version, and we're not pinning our versions necessarily to known trusted versions versus what is just kind of versions out there. So I think we're going to return back to some very old school concepts. So
yeah. For sure.
Yeah, my prediction for the 2027 report is probably convenience is going to be the first vulnerability and complacency will be the second. That's at 30,000 feet. Fill in the blank on the other stuff. Last question for you, Phil. Every MSP and SMB owner on this call closes their laptop right after this episode and does exactly one thing tomorrow based on the 2026 report and nothing else. In your opinion, what should that one thing be?
All right, I'm gonna give vulnerability management a rest because I think I belabored that to death. If you were not to do that, I would also making sure you have MFA implemented across the organization. Right, this is such a old school thing. We're still seeing a large amount of cloud provider environments that don't have MFA on administrator accounts. If that doesn't give you heartache, I don't know what to tell you, right? That it's not foolproof. It's not a silver bullet to everything. But I think it's that threshold, right, that we need to be considering.
Phil, and what about even just in time, right? Administrator accounts too. Do you like that approach as well? I'm just curious,
Yeah. But I think it helps kind of hinder some of the attacker process, right? When we think in terms of privilege escalation, just-in-time administrative accounts are big hindrance to those type, right? Short-lived administrative accounts. So, there's a lot of things that, a lot of technology now that can kind of help make this process more seamless.
For sure. Good. Well, I can't believe we are up against the hour already, and it would be cool to spend another one with you, Phil. As always, incredibly grateful and humbled that you come on every year for us, the MSPs. We are the unforgotten, it seems, when it comes to the CISA and the others, but we have an amazingly important role, I believe, in critical infrastructure and then just in general, right, in our U.S. GDP and abroad. So thanks again, bud. I really appreciate it. And love to have you back every year, obviously. So until then, Chris, thanks for filling in. Brian, wonderful to have you. Phyllis, as always. And everybody that sat in today, both on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Thanks, Phil. Amazing. Phil, take care, bud.
Thank you so much for having me. Cheers.
Thanks, all.
If you're in the Write a Boom community but not in our Discord yet, you're missing where the real conversation happens. Join community.writeaboom.com to access cybercall discussions, upcoming CTFs, boom camps, and early access to what's coming next. If you want to stay close to what's actually happening in the MSP security space, I'll see you there.